Okay, take 21. So, this is my memoir assignment. I did my memoir. I read The Body Papers by Grace Talusan. A little bit of background on Grace. She and her family are from the Philippines, and she moved to America when she was at a very young age. There's a little bit of information about her. Now here's the tricky part. Let's see if I can move my slide. Oh, I can. Okay. So let's just go back now. That kind of got messed up. But just be patient with me. I'm gonna figure this out here. Now that it's working, this is definitely going to be my last attempt doing this because it's taken me so long to get this far. Anyways, so like I said, she was from the Philippines, and they moved here from the Philippines, and so good stuff. So what led to Grace's mental illnesses? The main factor that led to Grace's mental illnesses was that she was molested and sexually abused as a child. And the abuse that she went through lasted 7 years, and it was inflicted by her grandpa. And so that's kind of what caused all the mental illnesses that she suffers with today. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the several mental illnesses that she has had and struggles with today. The first one I wanted to go over was the mental illness major depression. And so some of the symptoms that she experienced was a depressed mood all day and every day. She had a lack of interest and pleasure in doing everyday activities. And when she was diagnosed with these different mental illnesses, she was in college, in her first year of college. So with the second bullet point, she did not go to her college classes. She had no motivation to go to them and to participate. She also called in sick to almost every shift that she had at work. And a little quote from the book that she says is, "Even the mindless task of folding pledge letters and sticking address labels on to envelopes was overwhelming." And so that kind of just shows that even the simplest things that she needed to do were super hard for her, and that she had no motivation and she just didn't want to do it. She was just depressed. She also struggled a lot with self-harm. She had a story about her boyfriend hiding one of his pocket knives from her, but she found it, and she started stabbing a phone book because the urge to cut herself was so strong, and the phone book was kind of used to stop her from hurting herself. She also gained some weight. She didn't want she lost a lot of weight, but then she noticed that more men were giving her attention and stuff, and so she wanted to avoid that. So she gained all the weight back, and it was she said that it was kind of her protection, I guess, against being noticed and stuff. Another quote from her, she says, "I know there are consequences. I am too young to have feet and knees that ache this much. This is what a body can look like after it has been invaded." She also suffered a lot with suicidal ideation. A few things that she talked about that is she said she was always deeply disappointed to still be alive, especially after some of her depressive episodes. She also felt that there was nothing good in the world that she had to stay for. There was nothing good that she wanted to be here for. She When her aunts were diagnosed with cancer, she wished that she had cancer too, because then her mental illness would be prevalent and noticed, but also because she just thought it would be a good outlet to die, and so that was pretty sad. She also said that she thought about death every waking hour, and so it's pretty serious stuff. Another symptom she had was fatigue and loss of energy. She says in her memoir, she had no motivation to walk, drink water, talk to people. All she wanted to do was sleep. And that's all she did most of the time, was just sleep and just kind of dissociate herself from the things that were going on. The last symptom that she had was excessive guilt. She felt guilty about being depressed. She thought it was very narcissistic of her, and that she was just being self-centered. But she also suffered a lot of guilt from thinking that, like, her abuse in her situation was her fault. And so it's really hard. Grace also, the next mental illness that she had and was diagnosed with was generalized anxiety disorder. And so this one of the symptoms is that she had a lot of trouble sleeping. She had nightmares and night terrors. And like a side effect from that is that she could never really stay awake in school. And she talks in her memoir, even when she was talking to her friends, she'd be in the middle of a conversation, she'd be fast asleep, because it was that bad that she was just lacking in so much sleep. She also, when the abuse first started, when she was in like grade school, she said that she had a lot of trouble on focusing on school and doing well. And before the abuse, her teachers always thought she was a bright, smart kid. But when the abuse started happening, she slowly just lost her motivation to do any of her schoolwork and study for quizzes and stuff. And so her grades really went down, and she says that she had a lot of trouble learning during that time. She also suffered from excessive worry. In college, she said that she never wanted to leave the womb of her dorm room. She was terrified of going into empty hallways for the fear of getting attacked. And she also really avoided like using public restrooms. And if she did, she used them as fast as she could to avoid getting attacked in there. She was afraid that somebody was going to go in the stall next to her and bash her over the head or something. So it was pretty extreme worries there. She also still suffers from like irritability. She doesn't like being watched. She says, "This feeling of being observed is still something I can't stand." And she doesn't like that because she just remembers her grandpa always watching her closely, and she just doesn't like that feeling anymore. And she even went to say that she didn't want her husband to even be looking at her while she was doing the dishes, so it was pretty extreme. The next mental illness that she suffered from was PTSD. And the PTSD that she experienced was from her childhood experiences and from that sexual abuse. One of the symptoms of that is that she also could not sleep. She had nightmares and night terrors, like I said before. And again, she had those avoidance symptoms, such as avoiding people and avoiding places that made her uncomfortable or would trigger some of those memories and stuff. So some of the effects of Grace's mental illness. So I did emotional effects. So obviously she was severely depressed. She was always sad. She never wanted to do anything, no motivation, all those different symptoms of depression. And again, she was suicidal. She had consistent thoughts of wishing to be dead. She also felt worthless as a person, and overall, she just wasn't doing well emotionally. Her mental illness caused a lot of distress and a lot of dysfunction in her emotional state and in her life in general. She cognitively, she had no desire to work in school. She would flunk her quizzes and tests and just her classes in general. She also had no motivation to work. Another cognitive thing that I found is that she, before the abuse happened, she would always think of herself like a certain way, like she thought she was a happy child, she was enjoying her life, she was like having a good time. But after the abuse started happening, she had different thoughts about herself, and she no longer viewed herself as worthy or good enough, or she just, her whole self-concept changed. She also made excuses for her grandpa's behavior. It's as if she didn't want, like, she kind of took all the responsibility on herself rather than realizing that it was her grandpa's fault. Again, like blaming herself for the abuse, she would always just, in her memoir, she says that she felt that whenever she showed affection to her siblings or whatever, that it was just trying to egg on, or it was something that her grandpa would just do it to her too, and so it's kind of a bad situation. And then lastly, she felt that she had no control over her body. She felt like an object. She felt like she was only there for her grandpa's pleasure. Next way is physical. Obviously, she was oversleeping. She was not taking care of her like immediate needs, such as drinking water, showering, doing other like daily activities, keeping up your hygiene. Those things weren't important to her at the time. Again, she gained weight to protect herself from that attention from men, and again, she had trouble with cutting and self-harm. Social. She says that the abuse that happened to her affected her relationships in the future. She said a lot of her romantic choices were fueled by self-hatred, thus causing abusive relationships. She felt isolated from others. She had trouble connecting and having close relationships with others. A deep lack of trust in people, especially men. She also said that to this day, her parents still worry for her, and she says that they sometimes feel like immense guilt for what happened to her. She says that her mom will just be bringing her gifts or doing things for her, and she thinks it's just because her mom just feels so guilty about what happened to her, because the abuse happened for 7 years and nobody stopped it until she stood up, and so, yeah. Her family also lost their relationship to the grandpa, obviously, and to pretty much the whole side of their dad's family. A lot of the family just kind of stopped talking to them, and Grace's dad stopped talking to them as well. He didn't want anything to do with them, and so that's kind of a loss there. Spiritual, I wanted to add this one in because she does talk about it, and her family does come from like a Catholic background, so I thought it was important to add that in. She said that during this time of depression and other mental illnesses that she lost faith in God for a time, and it felt like she was isolated and disconnected from him. She also believed that she was a bad person, that was why bad things were happening to her. And overall, she just felt abandoned and ashamed of herself spiritually. She didn't feel clean, she didn't feel worthy, all those harmful things. So the road to recovery, Grace tried a lot of different treatments, First one was intensive and individual group therapy. This helped Grace to know that she wasn't alone in her suffering, that there was others that suffered with her, and it allowed her to speak up about her experiences and to kind of just face them. A couple things that she said from this little treatment section. She said she felt her therapist's kindness, acceptance, and sympathy. Another quote from her, she says, at the time, being seen by her was enough to make progress. I feel like that's super important because at that time, she felt like nobody could see her. She felt alone. She felt isolated. And so I think it's super important that she said just like being seen by her therapist and being accepted and being shown kindness was enough to make progress in her own life and in her road to healing. Another thing that she did to heal is she read articles and self-help books to help her understand her abuse and her abuser. And so I thought that was interesting. She had also attended self-defense classes with other trauma survivors, as well as she made friends with the other trauma survivors that suffered similar things that she did. The last treatment that she did was she did do drug therapy, so there was lots of different drugs that she took or still takes to help her in her everyday life to function. One thing that she said was that all of these forms of healing have made it possible for her to have a life. And so they did help her in good ways. So when relating to Grace's memoir, I cannot fully understand or relate to her because I have never been abused sexually or anything, or I didn't face abuse as a child. But I think I can relate to some of her feelings of depression when I've had some of those same types of feelings, but not so intense and for shorter amounts of times. There's just, I experienced it a lot when I was on my LDS mission. I was super not happy. I had no motivation. It was a really hard time for me. And so I can relate to some of the depression that she suffered with. And so, yeah. What I learned from Grace's memoir, I actually learned a lot from reading this memoir. It was a really good read. I highly recommend it. The first thing I learned was that childhood abuse affects someone for their entire life. I think that's important to remember because sometimes we forget that even though something happened to like a little kid, they're going to remember it for their whole life. So it's important to remember that abuse really does harm somebody for the rest of their lives. I also learned that there is always more healing to be done. She mentioned a lot in her memoir that she's not going to be ever fully healed, but that she's just going to keep doing the same things, going to therapy, taking those drugs to help her feel better. I learned a lot about personal strength, and that people who have been abused can overcome the trauma to a degree, and that they can lead happier lives in the future. I think that's important to remember as therapists, that there's still hope for these people. They can still live happy lives, and even through their trauma. I also learned a lot about the Filipino culture, and how family is super important to them. I learned a lot about Grace's family and about how important, like, even their relatives were, and so I think that's what made it even harder for her to be facing her grandpa's abuse, because family was so important to them. She talked a lot about racism in the beginning parts of this book. So I learned about how racism affects Asian Americans. Grace says that she felt isolated and alien compared to her other white friends. She said that she wanted to be white and stopped eating some of her Filipino culture's food, just so that she could be more like a white person. She lost part of her culture in the Philippines, and she feels like she still has to prove to this day that she has every single right that a white person has in America. What will I do with my knowledge? Like I said, I learned a lot. So the first thing I want to do is I want to strive to be more culturally aware of people and who they are. I'm continually reminded that there's a lot of privilege that comes with being white, and so that's something that I learned, especially from this book. I learned that as a future therapist, giving my clients time to speak up, being patient with them is super important. I'm sure I'll be facing a lot of clients that have suffered through traumatic experiences and abuse and other stuff like that, and I think it's important to just have patience with them and let them speak up when they want to, and not to pressure them into anything that they're uncomfortable with, because that will just drive them away. I learned that it is important to let clients know that they are not alone in their suffering. That's something that Grace said really helped, was just knowing that there's other people that suffered like her, and I think it's important to know that you're never alone. I learned that finding multiple treatments for different clients are important, so I can find the best way to help them. Like I said, Grace did a lot of different things to help her heal, and I think that's super important, just to have an open mind about the different treatments that can help people. I also learned that just because something has not happened to me, like personally, doesn't mean that I can't relate to the person and can't help them. And so, even though I couldn't directly relate to Grace, I, as a therapist, would still want to help her and try to understand her, and I think that's what's important. And the last thing I learned was it's just knowing that I want to strive to be better understanding trauma and abuse victims. I don't know if I would go into this field of helping these abuse victims, but I do want to have a better understanding for them, just so that if I do come in contact with them, that I can help them, and that I can do my best to bring them comfort and to help them heal. Alright, and then my last little question for my peers is, how would you approach someone who suffered so much from childhood trauma and sexual abuse? And then how would you get your family involved in the healing? Get the family involved in the healing process. I asked this question because in the book, it seems like Grace did a lot of things on her own. Like, her family wasn't really involved with her therapy. I mean, they tried to help and stuff, but I think if she would have received more support and more help from her family, that she could have healed faster. So I'm just curious of how one would get the family more involved with the healing process. And that is my PowerPoint. Again, I am thankful that I was able to do this project and read this book. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope you guys all enjoyed this PowerPoint. I know it's kind of a mess for a minute there, but